Wait, Dragon Drive is offensive? You know, the game that's probably made by the development team at Nintendo that made ARMS? Today I will present the potentially offensive aspects of Dragon Drive, both in its fumbled attempt at representing the underrepresented, but also its glaring inadequacies in the basic criteria of what any video game even is. So in part 1 of this video, we will ask the question as to whether this game Dragon Drive is disability coded. In part 2 of this video, regardless of where you stand on whether this game is supposed to be a stand-in shining moment for disabled folks, we're going to take a look at the, unfortunately, more than one rather insulting shortcomings of the breadth and depth of content available in this upcoming game Dragon Drive. And finally, in part 3 of this video, I will be delivering EPD their sentencing, which will specify what Nintendo's entertainment and planning division needs to do in order to atone for this situation. So we're going to jump right into part 1 of this video, guys. Is this game disability coded? Oh yeah, that's the wheelchair game about disabled people playing basketball in their wheelchairs, vehicles. So my concern right off the bat is that this game is, whether you say that wording of disability coded, it's certainly at a minimum disability baiting. And when I use that term baiting, a more straightforward example would be queer baiting. You know, when you see marketing materials for a movie, either in a trailer or like the thumbnail you see when you're scrolling through your options on Netflix and Hulu. If you see any insignia or just general clues that like, hey, this is an LGBT related piece of content, but then you choose to watch it on that basis and you find that the amount of LGBT related material in there is like a token inclusion, it's not really a movie about that. And so what's strange about, like, is Dragon Drive supposed to be depicting disabled people in wheelchairs? Or within the lore of this very specific game, is any and anyone getting into those vehicles in order to participate in this particular sport? Nintendo is not calling it anything in particular. They're just saying, hey, look at this. So for Nintendo to only call them quote-unquote vehicles, it's a little bit insulting off the bat because it's sort of giving up right off the bat to say, hey, wheelchairs are a taboo, we don't want to say that. Could it be that they are avoiding a stigma in order to boost sales? The way that they alter promotional materials in places like China, you know, when you have a Marvel movie in China, if it has a black person featured on the poster for the marketing, they will either make that character smaller on the poster, even put a mask on his face. I sort of get a little bit of those vibes when I see Nintendo insist on calling them vehicles when there's really only one thing that they actually are when you look at them. I'm not sure if this is Nintendo's subversive attempt to try to get people to accept wheelchairs as normal. Like, hey, look at these, they're just vehicles. Except for the fact that there's no incentive or real reason a person would seek out a vehicle of this kind unless they were disabled and walking was not an option. At that point, it just becomes a clumsier version of basketball, although the only counterpoint to that is the fact that there are the curved edges along the sides of the courts so that you can use your vehicles to grab some speed and then kind of roll up and off the ramp to do like a slam dunk or a cool pass or something. But even then, we already have Rocket League for that. And so the complete lack of lore presented so far in Dragon Drive certainly is not helping with any weird, uneasy ambiguity of what's actually being depicted in this game. I really don't understand why Nintendo just didn't come up with a custom name for these vehicles. To use that generic word, vehicle, are you then going to call a skateboard a vehicle? When you make a skateboard controls game on the Switch 3 with some sort of incarnation of the Wii Fit balance board, you honestly couldn't have called these vehicles something like a drag driver, push beast, zip car. Zip car is already a registered trademark of those rental cars. Whatever, call it a push beast. That was an opportunity to come up with a semi-memorable, quirky little name, but it just becomes so much weirder when, oh yeah, these are vehicles only. So alright, we're going to jump into part 2 of this video now, which will touch upon the insulting shortcomings, even when we get past the ambiguous branding of whether this is depicting disability gameplay. Even at best, if this is a genuine attempt to like subversively make wheelchairs and disability activities more mainstream and normal, well, if so, then Nintendo has done next to nothing to make this experience seem appealing or tempting. Now, I'm not going to list all the obvious things that you already know about how the characters are bland. These Among Us characters just seem like placeholders at best. They're a little bit creepy. And the arenas you're playing in are just gray and drab. They look unfinished prototype vibes. But there's also the very baffling aspect that it's hard to see who's on what team, because the two colors for the teams are just not super prominently obvious to see in the heat of the moment gameplay. I've watched enough videos with impressions about Drag and Drive that people have had hands-on gameplay sessions, and if a person is even a little bit unsure in the moment who's on their team and who should they avoid versus who they should pass to, I'm just kind of baffled. I don't want to have to bend over backwards and come up with a theory that the characters being a little bit hard to tell who's on what team is somehow color blindness coded. That seems like a stretch. But anyone that's played Splatoon knows that you look at any given character on the map, you instantly know intuitively whether they are friend or foe. But we have these creepy, nondescript, quasi-alien characters, and there's no lore to make sense of this situation the way there is in Splatoon, or even ARMS. I have to wonder if ARMS is the direct reason why there's no lore, backstory, or aesthetic really at all with Drag and Drive. If Nintendo is sore because they tried to make ARMS and its in-game lore a thing with all these bright, distinctive characters and in-game lore and world and the music, is it that didn't take off? So this time around, assuming it's the same team that did ARMS as doing Drag and Drive, they're like, all right, that didn't take, so let's just totally skip that this time around. It's just Drag and Drive with these Unity asset adjacent appearances. It starts to feel like sort of a ripple effect of why Smash Brothers stopped having cutscenes, which is the most legendarily ridiculous thing, that Sakurai stopped making any in-game story or cutscenes with the Smash Brothers games because the stuff was just getting uploaded to YouTube, and he was sore about it. And now Drag and Drive has no lore, purpose, or context to speak of. And you're hoping this game to succeed and become a thing? So the next criticism I would like to level on the inadequacies of what we've seen so far at Drag and Drive is that the characters are very frequently bumping into each other, and when you really collide into someone, it's like your character stops what they're doing and starts wagging their hands in the air like, whoa, I just got banged, so now both of my arms are wiggling around out of sync. It is the most uncool, clumsy, messy presentation where it looks like these players can barely handle the situation they've been thrust into, because as soon as you bump into someone, now your arms are going crazy like those wacky, wild, inflatable things outside of used car dealerships. Right? A game will sell if the characters look cool and badass and confident, and they're doing these cool tricks and pulling off full maneuvers with all the coordination and arm strength it takes to pilot these vehicles. Push beasts. It's bad enough that this crashing and arm waggling happens so frequently in gameplay, but dude, it even happens when you score a bucket and the camera pans out to give you that kind of victory camera angle because your team just scored a goal. Now your player character that just scored a goal is now heading down court to play defense, and after the coordination required to shoot a cool-looking basket, now you're returning to the other side of the court, crashing into an opponent for literally no reason, and waving your arms around like a chicken that's out of their depth. It's such the opposite of a cool victory pose. It just exudes this unfinished amateurish energy. And we know that Nintendo has the budget, so to deny this game's development those resources is rather baffling. You think that's bad? What about at the end of a match? Let's say your team wins the game, you're riding a high, you secure the W, you're looking for some fanfare. You could go back to the Nintendo 64, you look at that NBA Courtside video game with Kobe Bryant. Look at this. They win the game, they get the buzzer beater, they congregate at the middle of the court to celebrate, just like in real life. Okay, but in Drag and Drive, I'm not even going to show you. It's too insulting. The clock ticks down to 0, and everyone just stops in their tracks. Nothing happens. There's no unique additional behavior that kicks in when you win a match. You just stop in your tracks, and I guess you're supposed supposed to enjoy the process of waving your mouse pieces in the air so that your hands waggle in-game. It's all very so superficial. The idea that they're looking to charge any money for this is offensive when you look at how underfinished it is. There are certain amateurish moments where the engine that's operating here is like a freshman in college's first attempt at a project. And it's because there's a very artificial way that the ball behaves, where the ball will up and out of nowhere warp across the screen with no motion path to get from A to B. Like, let's say you're playing drag and drive, you make a shot, and it's bouncing on the rim, and you're like waiting there in anticipation, watching the ball bounce on the rim to see if it's gonna go in. And then enough time passes, you're waiting with bated breath to see if the ball will go in, and then out of nowhere, boom, it just snaps down all the way down to the ground. It just snaps from above the rim to all of a sudden, in an instant, with no transition frames, suddenly the ball is in the hand of someone who was standing underneath the bucket trying to get that rebound. You don't even see the ball travel from the missed shot down to the player on the ground. It's just, here it is hovering above the rim, and then snap, now someone's holding it. And there's a similar lack of transition animations when you roll up those ramps to try to do a slam dunk. You're just kind of awkwardly throwing yourself up into the air. Maybe it even sort of looks like you're going through the backboard, and even though your hand on the ball is nowhere close to where the actual rim is, you're just flying in the general direction of the net, and then suddenly you blink and then boom, suddenly you're dunking. There's no intermediary animation. I'm insulted by that. It's like you're playing a tabletop RPG of basketball rather than hands-on basketball. What good are the genuine motion controls and mouse physics if the ball is just going to snap from here to there like it's warping? You would think that these warp abilities would make the game a little more accessible, hopefully, because there's a little less precision required. You just get in the general area of the rim and you'll be guaranteed that slam dunk. But even the Nintendo staff member at the Nintendo Treehouse himself was struggling with the controls. At one point, he sets out specifically to show you how slam dunking works, tries to do a dunk, fails, and then says, yeah, I'm surprised I failed that dunk. It should be really easy in practice mode. And I'm watching along like, yeah, I know. And then later, there's a guy that tries to demonstrate the little hop jump that you can do, I think by flipping both mice simultaneously or something. Dude tries to do it once, he only jumps up in one wheel, tries again, fails, and then on the third attempt, he's able to do that little hop jump. And I guess when you do a hop jump, if you shoot a bucket, you get a little bit more trick points to add to your score. But if the people who literally work for Nintendo are being paid to promote and demonstrate to sell the game, if they are struggling to pull off even the most basic maneuvers, it's instilling zero consumer confidence in prospective customers. So if this game just totally lacks that accessible pick-up-and-play feel, it's going to be DOA. Lobbies are going to be empty mere weeks after it launches. Even if you do figure out how to eventually find your way with the controls, this game very clearly looks exhausting to play. And you already know that, the way you have to do the motions, that's going to get tiresome fast. Literally, you'll get tired. You're playing a game to kick back and vibe. Now, on one level, you could make the case fairly that there's a benefit to that, because to have a game like this that's so physically demanding, that's showing the rest of us what disabled people in wheelchairs experience, because they're needing to push themselves around any and everywhere, and it's certainly quite the strenuous workout when you're playing with wheelchairs in basketball or soccer or something. Even if that were the underlying message to make a point, you're seriously going to sequester this to a standalone paid game? I have seen multiple reference to this game's mouse control or mouse mode. I don't know if that implies that there will be an alternate control scheme that only uses the controller without any demanding motion requirement. But the thing is, if you have the option to just use like a Pro controller or Joy-Cons without having to use any mouse dragging functionality, well then I would think that the people using their Pro controllers exclusively would be at a huge advantage gameplay-wise, because they can get where they need to go with instant precision. Because the irony we're left with is that for a game that has such a big physical, strenuous requirement, there's some disabled people who would not even be able to play the game if their arms can't handle that workload. And it's like, this is the game that's sort of symbolically representing them, and yet it's super demanding and not very accessible. The idea that Nintendo still, after all these weeks after the big Nintendo Direct Switch 2 session, Nintendo still has not revealed the price. And that should tell you anything and everything you could wonder. They are delaying the announcement of how much Dragon Drive will be priced at for the same reason they didn't tell you the price of the console or Mario Kart World during the Direct. You had to seek that out later, so that reality check would not understandably pop the balloon of your hype of the good feels that you were getting while the Direct was happening live. Nintendo has not told you the price yet because they know full well to say, hey, this game X is not worth price Y. Are you kidding me with this? And so as we approach part 3 of this video, we're going to wrap up by touching upon the music. It's so bad, it's just a simple pentatonic riff, 1 3 1 1 3 1, like that's it. You can seek out a piano roll MIDI version of it on YouTube right now. It is depressing. It is so basic, and it's in the same tween wave genre of music from the initial Switch 2 reveal trailer. And I just think flat out that the people that are genuinely excited for this game are anticipating it for perfectly valid reasons, but they deserve more. They deserve more arenas and locations, character, at least some kind of context, or at least a basic honest acknowledgement about what is happening in the gameplay and why. What are exactly these vehicles? This is Nintendo after all. Can we really be that surprised? They seem to have found their way with the Switch. But here we are at the Switch 2, which is going to bring us now to the final part of this video, where I will now be delivering Nintendo's Entertainment and Planning Division their sentencing, which will specify what Nintendo's EPD needs to do in order to atone for this situation. Nintendo EPD, I hereby sentence you to fold Dragon Drive into Switch 2 Welcome Tour. Make it included with that and keep the price at the already ridiculous $10. There, I said it. When I think about how bare bones this game is, it is inexcusable thinking about the fact that Nintendo very likely delayed the Switch 2's rollout as long as possible because the Switch 1 was still absurdly profitable and still in demand, taking in new prospective customers on the regular. And so I look at the egregious, unprecedented way that Nintendo kept delaying the Switch 2, and I'm thinking to myself, well, at least the benefit of that is that they'll have a ton of time to really make sure that this thing launches with a solid repertoire of games. But why are they shortchanging Dragon Drive? If they're trying their hardest to replicate a Wii U moment, they are on their way. I mean, Botox Games can tell you that this Dragon Drive game does appear to be Wii U coded. It's a token implementation of the new technology with the mouse controls that is just for the sake of using the new mouse controls without an actual substantive, worthwhile gameplay experience to provide. And if it wasn't for Metroid Prime 4 making use of the mouse controls, it would be even worse. So as we wind down this video now, I want to thank you for listening. You want to know what game I, Alex, will be playing tonight instead of Dragon Drive? You know, me, Alex Yard, here at 91.6 WAYZ, the Alex Yard Zone, terrestrial internet radio. I will be playing tonight Rocket League. Find me over there on Rocket League under the name Alex Yard. Did you know that Rocket League, as of right now in 2025, is A, available on Switch, and B, it is free. The highly influential powerhouse of incredible depth and gameplay and team strategization, the game that Dragon Drive is clearly an offshoot knockoff of, trying to ride its wave of success, is already now available on Switch for free. And Nintendo expects people to purchase Dragon Drive by the millions because out of brand loyalty to Nintendo because of the Mario movie? Come on with this. The blatant discrepancy of bang for your buck between Rocket League and Dragon Drive leaves Nintendo exposed as the same company they always were when Reginald announced the Wii U, a company pushing the absolute limits of brand recognition hubris. So let's wrap up today's video now by revisiting Kobe Bryant's NBA game on the Nintendo 64 with a team victory sequence that instantly outshines anything coming down the pipeline in this Dragon Drive game on the expensive Nintendo Switch 2. You see that? Different animations depending on the character. They're actually doing something, huddling at center court to relish the victory. But you look at the victory animation when you win a game of Dragon Drive, and you're just stranded, sitting there, waving your arms, hoping for a lifeline. What is that about?